is James from Cinemassacre, and right now I'm really busy working on the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. But in the meantime, right here, I'm at GameTrailers, and I'm going to be talking about some games that I remember from my youth. Some pretty well-known ones, but I'm going to be going without a script right now, so I'm probably going to suck really bad, but let's go and see what happens. Sonic the Hedgehog. You see, that was the game that sort of lured me over to the Sega Genesis. You see, back then, there was a lot of arguing over what was better, Nintendo or Sega, and as if you had to own one or the other. Because, unless your parents were rich, you kind of did. You had to pick a side, So I was more of a Nintendo guy, and then Super Nintendo came along, so that was obviously the next logical step. And my next door neighbors had a Sega Genesis, so I kind of had best of both worlds. I got to go over their house to play Sega Genesis, and whenever I did, majority of the time they were playing sports games. So lots of sports games on Sega Genesis, and I wasn't really into them as much. See, I was more of a nerd, and they were more of the jocks. So you had the Nintendo household and the Sega household. And then one day I went over there, and they had this game called Sonic the Hedgehog. And wow, blew my mind. At first I thought it sounded kind of stupid, but then played it, and it was a side-scroller, and the first thing that struck me about it was how colorful it was. It had just a great palette of colors, just blue skies and green hills, and even the hills seemed to have all kinds of plant life. And then you hit that thing at the end of the level and all the animals come out, and it's just, really dazzling to the eyes. But the biggest thing about it was the speed. I'd never seen anything so fast like that. Like, this is basically my reaction was just... So Sonic rolls into a ball, he's going around loops, next thing he's hitting a spring and he's bouncing in the opposite direction, and it's just madness. Sega called this blast processing in the commercials, and whether it was a marketing gimmick or not, it was really just, the game had the fastest speed I'd seen yet. Besides that annoying stage in Battletoads. There's also this really cool configuration code, and when you do that, you can basically just add all kinds of game sprites all over the stage, and then you can basically it's kind of like creating a custom stage, sort of like an Excite Bike when you create your own track. That was really cool doing that, but it caused a lot of glitches. Then came Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I love that game. It's probably my favorite Sega Genesis game. And it actually was the game that single-handedly made me get a Sega Genesis. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is good for all the reasons that the first one is, but just all improved on. The music is great. The biggest difference is the inclusion of the character Tails. Now, Tails is Sonic's sidekick, and he can never seem to catch up. Sonic always seems to outrun him, and then Tails comes like helicoptering in after him. Yeah, Tails sucked. I don't know. The second player has the option to take control of Tails, but it was always annoying. Like, I'd always, basically the second player was getting the shitty end of the deal. So I'd play it with my sister a lot of times, and I'd be like, here, you play Tails. Because if you play as Tails, you might as well just be watching at that point. There is a two-player mode where you can both play simultaneously, but it's a split screen. It's alright, but I think the game is best enjoyed when it's a full screen. There is a bonus stage where you can both play on sort of like this half pipe, and it's like in 3D, and I remember thinking that was really cool when I saw that as a kid. Wow, it's in 3D. My favorite stage was the casino. That was awesome because there was just all these blinking lights. It was just like sensory overload. So Sonic is bouncing all over the place. Then there's those like stacks or ring things. You go through them, ding, 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 and that I thought was so cool. There was the flippers, and it's just like a pinball game. And I remember thinking they should make a Sonic pinball game. And what do you know, it happened. Sonic Spinball. Then there was Sonic 3, and I remember I found the underwater stages so annoying because it's like you're always underwater and then the music starts accelerating and it gets faster and faster and it's just like driving you insane. Like I want that music to stop, and then Sonic drowns and it's pathetic. It's sad. I hate seeing him drown. Then there was Sonic CD, and that was really cool too. I remember that one being really disorienting. It was like Sonic on crack. You're flying all over the place, but I loved it. It was awesome. And then everybody wants me to review the bad Sonic games, which I think came later because I've never played a bad Sonic game, but people ask me all the time. It's one of my biggest requests. All I can say about Sonic is, it's awesome. Killer Instinct is one of my favorite fighting games, and to go back and remember how exciting it was when it first came out, you got to go back and talk about the Nintendo 64, which at that time was going to be called the Nintendo Ultra 64, which made sense because it went from Super and now it's Ultra. So I'm really excited about the next Nintendo console, and by this point I'm like, you know, grown up, and now it's like I'm in high school. I just want to see like more badass kind of games, and so I was excited to see Nintendo take on, you know, like some more darker material. And Killer Instinct was this cool new game that was going to come out. It was going to be one of the launch titles on the Ultra 64, and first it was going to come out in the arcades. So I had to go see it. So I got together my friends. I was like, we got to go see this new game. We went to see it, and it exceeded my expectations. It was like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat rolled into one. Street Fighter for its fighting style and Mortal Kombat for its blood and its finishing moves. You could even say maybe Virtual Fighter for its, you know, three-dimensional feel. But what made Killer Instinct stand out from everything else was the combos. This game was all about just beating the crap out of your opponent, all about combos. Now, basically a combo, I'm sure everybody knows, is just a series of hits that's unblockable after the first hit connects. Except there are combo breakers, but you gotta be really quick-witted to pull one of them off. You know, Killer Instinct just looked slicker and more rad than anything I've seen. My favorite character right off the bat was Spinal. I mean, come on, a skeleton from Jason and the Argonauts. You know, I thought it was going to be my favorite character at least, but then when I played him, I realized he sucks, or at least he's really hard to learn. So I went to Saberwolf after that. I guess I like the horror characters. I was really impressed with the graphics and especially the movie cutscenes. There were stage knockoffs where you knock somebody off a building and the camera would like follow them down and they'd like smash onto a car or something. I think it's kind of funny when you're TJ Combo, you knock somebody off, they smash a car. I think it's TJ Combo's car, so he broke his own car. Just to clarify, the game was not 3D exactly. It was still a two-dimensional fighting game, but the camera sort of took an active part and it made it feel like, you know, you were fighting in more of a world, and that's what made it really cool. Like, I could just not possibly shoot enough sunshine up this game's ass because it was that amazing. So I wanted that at home. I couldn't wait for the Ultra 64, and for that being one of the launch titles, that would have been amazing. Nintendo Ultra 64. Well, the Nintendo Ultra 64 got delayed over and over and over again, and when it finally did come out, they took out the word Ultra for some reason and completely changed the logo from a really badass kind of Nova Blast looking thing to a cartoonish N, just like looked like a child's building block or something. And the launch titles were Super Mario 64, and basically kind of went more for that childish kind of tone again. Super Mario 64 was great, but it wasn't what I was waiting for. I wanted Killer Instinct. And to my disappointment, it never came out. We had the Super Nintendo version, though, to hold us off. So the Super Nintendo version was good too, but it didn't have the graphics. It wasn't like having the arcade game. So I was so pissed. For one thing, I wrote a letter to Nintendo and I asked them, why did you change it from Ultra to just Nintendo 64? Nintendo actually wrote me a letter back, and they said that they ran into some kind of legal issue with another company that had the Ultra name. I don't know who exactly it was, and I wish I still kept that letter, but this was back in high school, so it's funny to think like how pissed off I was back then. And now to this day, there is no arcade version, there's no home version of the Killer Instinct arcade that you could actually play. They did the second game. The second game came out on Nintendo 64. That was called Killer Instinct Gold. I don't know why they called it that. It was called 2 in the arcades. It wasn't as good as the first one. So, moment of silence for Killer Instinct on Ultra 64. And how about Killer Instinct 3? What the hell? Where is it?
Finish him!
I remember when I was a kid, I used to always go to a roller skating rink, and they had arcades there. And I remember always being more interested in the arcades. There was a crowd of gamers I was peeking through, and I caught a glimpse of this game called Mortal Kombat with a K. And the first thing that caught my attention was how realistic the characters looked. This wasn't the same cartoonish graphics in Street Fighter. It looked more like Pit Fighter, which was a game where they photographed and digitized real actors, but Mortal Kombat made me forget about Pit Fighter pretty quickly.
Scorpion wins.
The other thing that caught my attention was the blood. It was insanely bloody. Now, I've seen blood in games before, but usually it would be like a tiny sprinkle that would like disappear in the air or something. Never does it just land in like pools on the ground. So I'm like, what is this? Like, I was actually like shocked. I was like scared to even play it. And keep in mind, this is like, you know, in the roller skating rink. So there's just kids, you know, it's just all these little kids, you know, skating around. And within eyesight, there's this incredibly violent game. And I even heard at school that you could punch people's heads off and like rip people's hearts out of their chests, like Temple of Doom. And I thought that was a rumor. Like, you can't do that in a game. Like, if you did that, you'd have to put like a curtain around it or something, like the porn section at a video store. So I didn't believe it until I saw it. The thing about these finishing moves, or fatalities as they were called, is that you had to know how to do them. Somebody had to know the button combinations and stuff. So you were lucky if you saw it happen. The only way to know was to read about it in GamePro or whatever magazine there was at the time. And actually, there was somebody I know who got like a sheet printed out with all the moves and everything. He got it from his computer. Like, he connected the computer to some modem or something, and it like dialed up to the phone line. It was some like weird new thing. Yes, it was the internet. The first time I ever heard of the internet being used was for Mortal Kombat. That was a pretty historic moment.
Liu Kang wins. Fatality.
Momentarily, I lost interest in Street Fighter because Mortal Kombat was so much more intimidating. Like, What was scarier? Somebody saying tiger uppercut or get over here? Get over here! The spike pit. That was one of the most insane deaths I've seen in a game. They fight on top of a narrow bridge, and the ideal thing, you want to see them knock somebody off. Kind of like American Gladiators, where they try to knock each other off, but instead of cushions, you got a bed of spikes. And there's all these body parts laying around there. It was insane.
Kano wins.
The arcade wasn't ideal for me because it's kind of hard to play the game. You gotta stand in line, and there's always somebody there who's hogging the game, like somebody who's just like a master at it, and nobody can beat them. And if you go up there, you're only gonna get humiliated trying. So, there was always that person there who just knew all the moves, who must like cut school and go there to play the game and practice all the time. So anyway, it was all about getting it in the home. I wanted it at home to practice. Finally, it came out on the home consoles, but I had Super Nintendo, and Nintendo took out all the blood. So they changed the finishing moves, and it sucked. There was little like specks of gray. Some people said that was the blood, but they turned it gray. But other people said it was just dust. I don't know, but Sega Genesis kept the blood, but you had to put in a code to use it. So, wow, like kids aren't gonna find out the code.
Excellent.
One thing about Sega Genesis was that it only had 3 buttons. You had to use start for block, and it just wasn't ideal. There wasn't enough buttons on the controller, but Super Nintendo had it all covered. So as far as the controllers go, I know I definitely liked it better on Super Nintendo, aside from not having blood. Then the second game came out, Mortal Kombat 2, and when this one came out, I guess Nintendo realized we gotta put the blood in there. So the second game, blood intact, and everything was good. Mortal Kombat 2 was everything the first game was and more. More fatalities, more stage fatalities. There was a spike ceiling, a pool of acid. It was mind-blowing. There were friendship moves, just in case you wanted to be nice. There were babe-alities, and like it was just weird. Like it just seemed like there was no limit to the kind of things you could do. My favorite character was Baraka. He had the teeth and the blades. He was the most intimidating one, I thought. One thing about the second game is that there were all kinds of in-jokes with the people who made the game, like with Toasty in the bottom right, Dan Forden, and then you had John Tobias and Ed Boon's names spelled backwards as like Noob Saibot as like a hidden character and stuff like that. So it was one of the first games where I started actually thinking anything about the people who made it. It goes all the way back though to Atari with Howard Scott Warshaw, how he used to like, sneak his initials into it here and there. There'd be all kinds of Easter eggs and hidden things you could find. Hidden secrets were a big part of the game. There were hidden characters that you could unlock, like Smoke and Jade. And this sort of spawned lots of rumors. So my friends and I would pass on all these stories in school, which we never knew were true or not. I guess they were mostly just things that we wished were in the game. One that I heard a lot was a nude code, where I guess you fight nude. And then there was a curse code, I guess, where like Scorpion would say, "Get the fuck over here!" But none of it was true. There was even something I heard about, there's a switch on the back of the game where you can increase the blood. So my friends and I tried to drag one of the arcade machines away from the wall so we could like look for the switch, and no such switch was to be found. There was another rumor I heard that you could play as a character called Hornbuckle, and the way to do it was on Super Nintendo. You play the 2-player mode, so you fight off against a friend. You have to do 250 fights. If you do 250 in a row, you will fight Hornbuckle. Well, we stayed up all night. We tried it. Nope. Waste of time.
Reptile wins.
Mortal Kombat 3 was still good, but it wasn't way better than the second one, the same way that the second was, way better than the first. It was more or less the same. So I think I was starting to, my interest in Mortal Kombat was starting to decline at that point. There's all kinds of robot characters in the game, which I thought was weird. And the fatalities seemed to get kind of lazy. Like there were so many where you just see somebody blow up. On the Super Nintendo, they'd explode and you just see a pile of bones. There'd be like 5 heads and 10 arms. Like, what? The newer games kept getting more and more interesting. Mortal Kombat 4 went to 3D. You rip somebody's leg off and beat them or whatever. So it was always cool waiting for the next game all the time, but it was never as shocking and as fresh as it was when the first game came out. As a kid, what got me hooked on Double Dragon was the title alone, and that's a great thing when you can appeal to a kid's senses by giving them a really cool word like dragon. I love dragons, but it wasn't just dragon, it was Double Dragon. Whoa, I had to play this game. Then I played it and realized it didn't have the kind of dragons I knew, not the ones that fly and breathe fire. No, this was about thugs that kidnap your girlfriend and you gotta kick their asses. It had one of the greatest opening scenes to any video game ever. It tells you everything you need to know without bullshitting around with any kind of, opening story or anything. They go up, they punch this girl in the stomach, throw her over the shoulder, they walk away, and then it's like, what? Then you gotta go kick their asses, and it gets you fired up. You wanna go out and, beat people up after that. One of the innovative things about the game was that you could interact with your environment. Like you might see a box or an oil drum or something. You pick it up and you throw it at people. A lot of times you can disarm the enemies, you can take their weapons. You can also learn new moves as you go on. So there's like the jump kick, or you hit them with your elbow, or you jump on top of somebody and punch them on the ground. Or my favorite was when you knee them in the stomach and then you grab their hair and you throw them. And you always try to position yourself so there's something behind you. Like I always like when there's like a pitfall or a river or even a wall or something, because you want to throw them into something, and that's like a little bonus. So the game's only 4 levels, but they're some of the hardest levels you'll ever play. Toward the end, it gets brutally hard. It becomes more like a platform game than a beat 'em up. And once you have to start jump kicking your way across platforms, stalactites are fun and all kinds of shit. You're trying to hop across lava. That's when it got really annoying. And then you get to the 4th stage and it's these bricks coming out of the walls, and I swear there's no pattern. Every time I play it, I can never tell. You just walk in front of them and then boom, you're dead. I got so frustrated with that game as a kid that one time I took it out of the NES and I just threw it across the room. And then my dad comes in and is like, you want me to smash it with the hammer? That'll be more efficient. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Because with me, I had to beat the game. So you get to the last guy, second to last guy. He comes out with a machine gun and he just shoots you down and you're dead. That's it. I'm like, what, a fucking machine gun? Nobody has a gun in the game? I can never beat the machine gun guy. Still to this day, I don't think I can. But the last enemy is, Jimmy Lee. But, let's back up, okay? So the arcade version was a co-op game. It's Billy Lee and Jimmy Lee, both fighting against the thugs, but the NES couldn't handle that or whatever, so all you have is Billy. Even if you pick 2 players, you both alternate and you both control Billy Lee. I never understood that. Why isn't the second player Jimmy? Well, anyway, turns out Jimmy is the final boss in the game. That's right, you face your own brother. Why are they on bad terms now? It's a great twist, but there's no explanation given. I guess you could say this is where, the NES, it just leaves it all to your imagination. The only way you could play 2 players at the same time on the NES version was to pick the versus mode. Now this was where It was basically like a sort of a precursor to tournament fighting games, but if you want to call it that, it's the worst tournament fighter ever. So, for one thing, you can only play as the same character for some reason, so it's always a doppelganger fight no matter what. And you can run into the walls, and you just mash buttons all the time. You just go up to the other person and and that's it. So, it sucks. Then there's Double Dragon 2, and I love that one even more than the first one. I used to play it all the time. There's something just fun about the fighting mechanism. It was just like addicting, you know, all the combos, you bust people up, and you know, there's that chopper stage where you're up in the air and you can knock people out the window and you see them fall out the chopper. And then there was these spike ceilings, I remember. I think it was on like stage 4. And basically the ceiling is all covered in spikes. And when you get them into like a punch combo, you uppercut them into the ceiling, and it's like 3 hits in one. It's like, number 1, your fist. Number 2, the ceiling. Number 3, the floor. So it's like, just like that. Then there's the locomotive, and I love that because the locomotive comes out and just covers the whole screen, and you got to climb up there and just knock people off. It's therapeutic. The only thing I didn't really like about the game was the way you kick. The kicking was a little awkward because you always kick backwards for some reason. It's hard to explain, but if they're in front of you, you punch. If they're behind, you kick. Also, Stage 6, I believe, was where these platforms start disappearing all over the place. And then, it became like a platforming game and not a beat-em-up. And those platforms were a bitch. Double Dragon 3 was like a sick joke. One life, no continues, Bimmy and Jimmy, need I say more? We don't need to get into that again. There were other games, Battletoads and Double Dragon, that was a lot of fun. One of my favorites was actually the Neo Geo CD version, and it was just called Double Dragon. It was a tournament fighter. And believe it or not, one of the best, in my opinion. It's one of my favorites, at least. I think it's about time Double Dragon comes back. Super Mario Kart was one of many games where Nintendo took a bunch of their characters and put them all into one. You got Mario, Luigi, Princess, Toad, Donkey Kong, Bowser, and whoever else. It was kind of like a novelty thing where that would happen a lot of times, but Super Mario Kart was such a great game that it surpassed the novelty factor. There's many versions of it, but as usual, I prefer the Super NES version because that's the first one that I played when I was a kid that left the biggest impression on me. Up to this time, my favorite racing game was F-Zero, but the one thing about F-Zero that was kind of annoying was that you couldn't play 2 players. Super Mario Kart, you could. Split screen, but you could still do it, and it was really competitive. That was the thing. It was a party game. It's like you want to get your friends together and you just get real high energy. The racetracks were really neat. There was that one where it was like all mud and you're just kind of dragging through it really slow, and then there's that one where it's like Rainbow Road, I think it was called, and that was really hard because you keep falling off all the time, and it was like a rainbow in space. I don't know, it was like kind of like Rainbow in the Dark. The thing about Super Mario Kart was that you weren't supposed to race fair. The whole idea was to sabotage the race for the other players. You come around, there'd be a banana peel, you slip on it, and you're like, who the hell put that there? One of your friends is laughing and, you know who did it. You throw shells at each other, then there's those red shells that always hit them no matter what. Unless they got the feather, they can like jump it or something. Then there was an ice level, I think it was called Vanilla Lake or something, and it was like you'd slide around all the time. Then there was the haunted house stage. That was really cool. I liked that. But aside from all that, there was the battle mode. The battle mode was where you'd have these 3 balloons and you'd face off against one of your friends, and you kind of go around in like a maze trying to hunt each other down, and you want to just slam them with shells and just pop all their balloons. And there'd be like walls in the way, and you can kind of like jump over it if you have the feather. And sometimes people would jump like out of bounds just to avoid having a red turtle shell come at them. It was all about being sneaky and just about being an asshole. So that's what it was. It's almost like a genre of games. Just games where you're not supposed to play fair, you're just supposed to be an asshole. And you ever have a time when like you think you were too much of an asshole to somebody? You ever like regret it? Like I went to the prom with this girl in high school, and then afterwards I went to her house, we played Super Mario Kart, and I kicked her ass. And I was really mean, actually. I was. Now I think back, I'm like, you know, I was an asshole. Yeah. Do you think I should have let her win? Yeah. Used to play with my sister a lot. My sister used to kick my ass a lot, though. She would cheat. You get together with friends, there'd always be an asshole in the bunch. It's an asshole game. End of story. I want to talk about Contra. It was one of the all-time classic NES games. Everybody who owned an NES, it was required that you had Contra. Every friend that I knew always had a shoebox just full of Nintendo games, and Contra was always in there. So it's definitely a game I have a lot of fond memories, and there's really not a lot you can say bad about Contra. It's pretty much a perfect example of a side-scroller shooter. So it wouldn't really work as a nerd review. So instead what I decided to do was sort of like a, like unscripted commentary on it, and just talk about a video game memory that I'd like to share. My first time beating Contra. To beat a game back then was kind of a big deal at the time. You didn't always beat every game you owned, and some you were more skilled at than others. And I never considered myself that skilled in general. I always felt like the other kids were usually better at things than me. Like, I was never good at sports or anything like that. I always had a really low self-esteem. But I realized something, that whenever kids would come over and they'd play Contra with me, they'd come over like, hey, you want to play some Nintendo? Yeah, what game? How about Contra? Yeah, let's play Contra. And you start it up, I'd hit the start button, and then they'd be like, wait, hit the reset, and then I'm like, what? And they say, you forgot to put in the code. I'm like, oh, the code? Oh, there's a way to cheat with this game, huh? Contra wasn't the hardest game. I can think of many others that are harder, but you still wouldn't say it's easy. Contra is a pretty challenging game. You have bullets flying at you constantly, one-hit deaths, 3 deaths, and then, it's game over. You get continues, and you can get some extra lives if you keep doing good, but basically, you gotta stay focused 100%. But this code that everybody was using would give you 30 lives. Now that really comes in handy, but for some reason, I never used the code. Not when I played alone, but when friends would come over, they'd always have to put in the code. So, I don't know why I never did it. It was all over Nintendo Power, so I knew what the code was, but I just felt like it was an inconvenience, so I tried to get it to work one time. It didn't work. Even to this day, I don't even think I know it. It's up, down, left, right, BA, or AB, one of those. But anyway, the fact that I never used the code was the reason I got good at the game. And the day I beat the game, I was probably around 9 years old, maybe 10, and it didn't happen the way I expected. I thought it would happen late at night after several hours of trying, but no, it actually happened really early in the morning when I wasn't even trying at all. my morning routine would go 6 in the morning, my mom would wake me up, she'd make me breakfast, send me to the bus stop, and by 7:30 the bus would come take me to school. For a kid, that's a lot of extra time. You don't gotta shave or anything, so you don't got anything else to do. So when I'd roll out of bed, I'd play some video games. And 6:30, Video Power would come on. Yeah, it was this crazy game show. It came on at 6:30 in the morning, which is so weird looking back. Well, this particular morning, I felt like playing Contra. My eyes are all bloodshot. I'm in this zombified state. But somehow, that was the perfect mindset to be in, to be focused enough to beat the game. So I'm doing good, and I'm not getting hit. I'm on fire. In a half hour, I'm at the last stage. I'm like, oh my god, I might beat the game. By now, my mom's yelling at me, like, come eat your damn waffles or your pork roll or whatever. And I'm like, no, you don't understand the urgency of this. I don't even care I'm missing Video Power. Fuck Johnny Arcade. The school bus is gonna have to wait. I'm beating Contra. My dad comes in and is like, why don't you pause it? And that's the classic parent comeback. Why don't you pause it? I'm like, well, how am I going to focus in school knowing that I have a Contra game at home that is paused on the last stage? No. So I'm getting closer to beating the game. My parents are both watching from the doorway behind me, and I could feel the excitement is actually sweeping onto them. And that feeling of having people watch you play a video game, that's the drive that pushes you forward. And all these years making nerd videos, I've actually gotten that feeling back, that edge, that eye of the tiger. Because when I'm making a nerd video, literally the entire world is watching because of the internet, and I would have never imagined that years ago. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie or something. But anyway, having people watch me play a video game has actually helped me personally recapture that do or die feeling, and I've truly gone back to the past. Another thing really exciting about this moment was just knowing that I'd be able to go to school and tell my friends what the end of the game looked like. Because back then you couldn't look it up on the internet and find out. Like for example, Legend of Zelda, the instruction manual talked about Ganon, and everybody knew the end of the game was going to be some guy named Ganon, but nobody knew what Ganon looked like. Same thing with Contra. It talked about the Red Falcon. So I get to the end of the game expecting some kind of fiery bird or something, and then I see that thing. I'm like, oh my god, is that the Red Falcon? It blows up. The game keeps going. No, I knew it wasn't over. So then I get to this giant heart, and it's clearly a dead end, so I know this is the last boss. I'm really excited, but at the same time, a little disappointed that this is what I'm going to have to report to my friends. Like, hey, I beat Contra. Oh, you did? What was the last guy? It was like this giant heart. Well, anyway, I didn't have time to question it. I had an adrenaline going. My own heart was beating really fast. I'm literally shaking like, oh my god, I'm going to beat the game, I'm going to beat the game, I'm going to beat the game. And I beat it. I beat Contra. And my parents are clapping, and my dad says another typical parent reaction like, oh, you beat the game, good. That means you're going to stop playing it all the time. So I eat breakfast, get on the school bus, and go to class, brag about it to all my friends, and I beat Contra without the code. And to this day, whenever somebody asks me if I beat Contra, I say, I beat Contra before breakfast.